I remember that day at the Space Telescope Science Institute, Baltimore, like it was yesterday. Not... How long has it been? Months? Years? Time lost its linearity ever since the darkness started looking back. But back then, at the very beginning, the air was humming with excitement, practically electric with anticipation. The launch of the James Webb Space Telescope had been a triumph, and now we, a select few astrophysicists, were the first to receive the raw data, the first images from the depths of space that no human eye had ever seen. The place smelled of ozone from the humming equipment and slightly burnt coffee, the fuel for sleepless nights of analysis. I could feel the building vibrate from the cooling systems for the giant server farms beneath us, a thrum of impending discovery. My name is Dr. Ethan Keller. I've dedicated my life to studying galaxy formation, to searching for answers in the cold void. The Webb was the pinnacle, an instrument that promised a revolution, and it delivered one, just not the one we dreamed of. I'd spent years developing data analysis algorithms specifically for this telescope, imagining the nebulae and galaxies it would reveal. The reality surpassed my expectations, but not in the way I'd thought. The first images were breathtaking. The spiral arms of distant galaxies, nebulae like watercolor paintings by a divine artist, like the Carina Nebula, but 1,000 times more detailed. Stellar nurseries blazing with the energy of newborn suns. My colleagues and I exchanged awestruck glances over our monitors, pointing out particularly stunning shots, debating the redshift of distant objects. It was pure, unadulterated scientific euphoria. I felt like Columbus, but instead of new lands, an unexplored ocean of the universe was spread out before me. In those first few hours, it felt like all the secrets of creation were about to be laid at our feet. My specialty is deep space, the earliest moments of its existence. I had the Webb pointed at a sector that was, theoretically, empty, a region where we expected to see only the faint echoes of the Big Bang, the cosmic microwave background. And at first, the data confirmed the theory. Dots, dots, and more dots of light on an infinite black canvas. Standard procedure. Calibration, noise reduction, applying filters. I worked methodically, almost on autopilot, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup with the NASA logo on it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running analysis scripts out of habit. And that's when I noticed it. A region. A small, irregularly shaped patch on one of the deep field images. It wasn't just black. It was perfectly black. Not an absence of light like you'd find in intergalactic space, which still has background radiation, but more like an active absorption of it. Not a single photon, not the faintest hint of the infrared radiation that the Webb is so sensitive to. It was like a hole cut in the very fabric of reality with invisible scissors, as if someone had patched the image with a material that didn't obey the laws of physics. At first, I wrote it off as a sensor artifact, a glitch in the NIRCam detector, maybe a dead pixel, a cosmic ray hitting at just the wrong angle, a speck of dust on the lens, though that seemed unlikely with such a complex, self-cleaning system. I checked the telemetry, all systems normal, sensor temperature stable. I ran diagnostics on the sensor array, perfect. I compared it with data from adjacent sectors, taken minutes apart. The patch was stable. It didn't move relative to the distant quasars. It was there. It didn't look like a dead pixel or a calibration error. Its shape was too organic. A knot of anxiety, still faint and almost subconscious, tightened in my chest. This was strange, inexplicable. It didn't fit any known model. I zoomed in on the image, cranking the contrast to maximum. The computer's fans whirred to life, processing terabytes of data. The blackness remained black, but its edges, they weren't smooth. They seemed slightly jagged, fibrous. At maximum magnification, I could almost distinguish something like an interweaving of dark threads forming this absolute void, as if someone had spilled ink on the astronomical plate, and the ink was alive. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. Maybe it was fatigue. A full day without sleep takes its toll. I glanced at the clock. Almost 3 a.m. Around me, in the dim light of the control center, other monitors glowed, but most of my colleagues had already left or were napping in the break rooms. The silence was only broken by the steady hum of the servers and the occasional click of a keyboard in a far corner. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, creating a sterile but unsettling atmosphere. I looked at the screen again, at the blackness. It drew my gaze, mesmerizing in its wrongness. There was something sinister in this perfect void, something unnatural. It was like looking not into space, but into the eye of something dead and infinitely ancient, or worse, something alive and hungry, lurking in the dark between galaxies. Did I just imagine it? Or did one of the tendrils on the edge of the patch shift ever so slightly? No, of course not, just my tired imagination. I saved the image file, giving it a neutral name, Anomaly, Sector 7G, Deep Field. I wrote a short message to Maya Rodriguez, my most trusted colleague and friend, asking her to take a fresh look in the morning. Weird artifact or something else. Coords attached, X 1.202, Y 5.200. Let me know what you think.
Closing the program and shutting off my monitor, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The technical euphoria of the day had evaporated, leaving behind only a dull, inexplicable dread. I walked out of the STSCI building into the pre-dawn Baltimore sky. The stars, visible even through the city's light pollution, seemed distant and somehow vulnerable, like tiny candle flames in the wind before an approaching storm of absolute darkness. The same darkness I had just saved a piece of to a hard drive. I hailed a cab, and as the car drove me home to the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from the windows of houses, but from somewhere above, from the very blackness I had just seen. I made it back to my townhouse on the outskirts of Baltimore as morning broke. The sky was a heavy, leaden gray, promising a thunderstorm. The first thing I did when I got inside was brew the strongest coffee I could, trying to wash away the cloying fatigue and the strange anxiety that had clung to me since leaving STSCI. But the image of the perfectly black patch was burned onto my retinas. I barely slept, tossing and turning, falling into short, troubled dreams where dark tendrils spread across the starry sky, devouring the light. Toward evening, the promised storm broke. The wind howled in the chimney and heavy raindrops hammered against the living room windows where I had set up a makeshift office. Lightning momentarily illuminated the neighboring houses and rain-slicked trees, and thunderclaps shook the walls. The perfect atmosphere to dive back into studying the cosmic anomaly. The lights in the room flickered a few times, and I winced, hoping my computer's uninterruptible power supply would hold. I opened the file again. Anomaly, Sector 7G, Deep Field. My heart skipped a beat. Was I imagining it? Or had the patch gotten a little bigger? No, that was paranoia. I chalked it up to the play of light and shadow on the screen. Eye strain. Focus, Ethan. Scientific method. I decided to apply our most advanced magnification and processing algorithms, the ones we use to detect faint structures in proto-galaxies. The processor whined as the loading bar slowly crawled across the screen. I zoomed in, closer and closer, on the anomalous region at coordinates X 1.200, Y 5.200. The blackness remained absolute, but its edges, under extreme magnification and digital enhancement to pull out hidden details, what had previously looked like tendrils or fibers became clear. They were silhouettes, long, writhing, segmented forms, tangled together in a tight mass of absolute darkness. They resembled giant, impossible worms or centipedes, each one made of pure night. Their bodies twisted at non-Euclidean angles, as if geometry itself warped around them. I could see something like countless thin legs or cilia along the sides of these things, moving at the very edge of visibility where the algorithm struggled to extract any data from the nothingness. It looked like a microscopic view of a knot of worms, only this was the size of a galaxy and made of concentrated void. A cold, sticky horror began to rise from the pit of my stomach. This was not an artifact. This was not data error.
This was something. Just then, a video call came in. Maya. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady, and answered. Her face, framed by dark curls, appeared on my secondary monitor. She looked concerned. Ethan, you okay? I got your message from last night. What are these coordinates? I opened the file. It's just a black patch. Probably a calibration error or... Zoom in, Maya. I cut her off, my voice trembling slightly. Zoom all the way in. Apply the C12 contrast filter and the Viridian edge enhancement algorithm. Confusion flickered across her face, but she started following my instructions. I could see her working, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Then she froze, staring at her own monitor. Her expression shifted from professional curiosity to something else. Disbelief and a flicker of fear. What is that? She whispered. The thunder outside cracked again, and the lights flickered, distorting her face on the screen for a split second. I don't know, Maya, I answered honestly, but it's not an artifact. Look at the segmentation, at those appendages. They look organized. Organized? Ethan, this looks like something out of a Lovecraft story scaled up to astronomical size. This can't be real. There has to be an explanation. Interference from something unknown? A new kind of signal contamination? Her voice was shaky. She was clearly grasping for a rational straw. I've checked everything, Maya. The telemetry, the sensors, the adjacent images. It's there. It's stable. And I think it's gotten bigger since yesterday. Bigger? That's impossible. The rate of change. Ethan, are you sure? Maybe it's just... I'm not sure, but that's what it feels like, I said, rubbing my temples. We need to schedule more observation time on this sector immediately, and we need to calculate its parameters: size, distance, possible movement. Movement? You think it's moving? Genuine horror crept into her voice. I don't know what to think, but we have to find out. We agreed to meet at STSCI early in the morning and bring in Leo Chang, our top systems engineer and visualization specialist. After I ended the call, the storm reached its peak. The rain was lashing so hard it felt like the windows might shatter. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, and the whole house shuddered. The power went out completely, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the laptop screen with its image of the black, writhing things, casting sinister shadows on my face. Did I imagine it, or did the silhouettes on the screen stir the moment the lights went out? No, it had to be the storm and my frayed nerves. But the thin primal terror of this discovery had already taken root in my soul. The next morning, STSCI was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. The storm had passed, leaving behind damp, fresh air, but inside the center, tension was palpable. I hadn't slept. The writhing black form seared into my mind. Maya was waiting for me at the entrance, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. We gave each other a silent nod. No words were necessary. We found Leo Chang in the visualization lab, surrounded by a wall of monitors. Leo was a genius, capable of extracting maximum information from any dataset, but right now, even he looked baffled. On the main screen before him was our anomaly, magnified and processed. "Morning," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. His voice was quieter than usual. "You two gave me quite a puzzle last night. I've been running diagnostics all night. This is no artifact. No known type of interference, glitch, or cosmic phenomenon produces a signature like this. This is something else entirely." "That's what we thought," Maya confirmed. "What have you found?" "Well, first, the size," Leo said, pointing to a series of calculations on an adjacent monitor. "Based on the lack of parallax and the assumed distance to the background, the farthest visible galaxies in this sector. This structure is colossal. Each one of those worm-like forms, by the most conservative estimates, is larger than an average star. The entire cluster, it's the size of a small galaxy. My breath caught in my throat. The size of a star for a single worm? Second, Leo continued, his voice dropping even lower, I compared the current image with data from a few hours earlier and from yesterday. Ethan, you were right. It's growing, or it's getting closer. Closer? Maya breathed. Yeah, I ran a vector analysis of the change in apparent size and luminosity, or rather the lack thereof. If my calculations are correct, and if we assume it's moving towards us, then its velocity, it's, he hesitated, searching for the words, it's several times the speed of light. A heavy silence fell over the lab, broken only by the hum of the computers. Faster than light. It violated every known law of physics. It was impossible. That can't be right, Leo, I argued, though an icy dread was already crawling up my spine. Check the calculations again. Maybe there's an error in the distance measurement, or it's some kind of gravitational lensing effect. I've checked 3 times, Ethan, Leo said, shaking his head. Used different methodologies. The result is the same. Either it's expanding at an impossible rate, or it's flying toward us using some unknown physics. Or it doesn't obey our laws at all. He pointed to the screen where a 3D model of the anomaly, constructed from edge analysis, was slowly rotating. The segmented bodies twisted and intertwined, as if alive. I've been calling them crawlers, Leo muttered, because that's what they look like. Crawlers. The name felt horrifyingly accurate. We have to report this to Director Dugan immediately, Maya said, her voice firm. He won't believe us, I countered. Faster than light speed? Worms the size of stars? They'll laugh us out of the room, tell us we're overworked. But the data, Maya began.
The data can be interpreted in different ways, Leo cut in. You can always find a way to blame it on an error if the result is too insane, especially when you're talking about something that threatens our very understanding of the universe. He had a point. The scientific community was conservative. Presenting a discovery like this, it was tantamount to declaring the Earth was flat.
What could it be? Maya whispered, staring at the rotating black silhouettes.
Living darkness, Leo said quietly, and his words hung in the air. Something that existed before light, something that eats it. At that moment, the intercom buzzed with the voice of Director Dugan's secretary. Dr. Keller, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Chang, Director Dugan would like to see you in his office, immediately. We exchanged glances. It seemed our late-night activity in the system hadn't gone unnoticed. It was time to face the skepticism. But looking at the screen, at those silent, impossible crawlers creeping toward us from the abyss of time at a speed faster than thought, I had a feeling the laughter wouldn't last long. The scientific thriller was rapidly turning into something far more terrifying. The omen wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was staring back at us from the screens of our most advanced instruments. The meeting with Director Scott Dugan went exactly as I'd expected. He listened with a stone face, arms crossed over his chest. Dugan was an administrator to the bone, a man for whom the Institute's reputation and stable funding were paramount, far more important than any scientific discovery, no matter how incredible. He glanced through our calculations, looked at Leo's visualizations, and shook his head. Instrument error, he declared. Probably a combination of factors. A stray light source from an uncalibrated object, resonance interference in the sensor matrix, maybe even a software bug in the processing algorithm. But sir, Leo tried to argue, we've ruled out all those possibilities. The telemetry is clean, the algorithms have been verified. Dr. Chang, I appreciate your expertise, but we're talking about a claim that violates the fundamental laws of physics. Before we raise alarms and risk the reputation of the entire JWST project, we must be absolutely certain. Run a full diagnostic. Compare it with Hubble data for this sector. Find a rational explanation. Faster-than-light travel doesn't fit into any rational explanation, Maya said quietly.
Then there's an error in the calculations, Dugan snapped. He looked at me. Ethan, I understand your excitement as a discoverer, but sometimes that can lead you down the wrong path. Take a couple of days off. You look exhausted. It was a polite dismissal. He had effectively shown us the door, advising us not to start a panic.
I was angry and confused. Take time off while that thing was hurtling toward us, or growing, devouring space itself? I felt like Cassandra, whose prophecies no one believed. But anger gave way to a new, cold fear. What if Dugan was right, and this was just an error? But what if he wasn't? What if the crawlers were real? I couldn't just sit on my hands. Official channels were closed, but I still had access to the archives. I decided to dig deeper. An anomaly this huge couldn't have just appeared out of nowhere. If it existed, maybe it had been noticed before, but dismissed as an observation defect or simply ignored. I sat down at my computer, ignoring Dugan's advice. First, I checked the Hubble archives for the same sector of the sky. Yes, there was a slight obscurity, a patch with lower background starlight, but Hubble's resolution was too low to make out any details. It could easily be written off as an interstellar dust cloud or just a statistical fluctuation. Nothing concrete. Then I went further back. Digital archives from old observatories, Mount Palomar, Kitt Peak. Hours blurred together, my eyes aching from the screen's glow. And then, late at night, digging through the digitized archives of the Lick Observatory in California, I found it. A glass photographic plate. Date, August 17th, 1913. Low quality by modern standards. Grainy emulsion, the marks of time. But the coordinates matched ours. And there, on that old, yellowed plate, in the exact spot where the blackness of the crawlers now gaped, there was a smudge. Smaller, less distinct than on the web images, but unmistakably there. An irregularly shaped dark patch standing out against the faint pinpricks of stars. A brief note from the astronomer who took the picture was attached. Emulsion defect? Strange area of darkness. Chords X 1.20, Y 5.20. An emulsion defect. They had just ignored it a century ago, but I knew now it wasn't a defect. It was them. The shadow was growing. It had been there 100 years ago, maybe longer, and it had been slowly, inexorably expanding or approaching us for decades, unnoticed due to the imperfection of our instruments. A chill ran down my spine, turning into icy needles. This wasn't a sudden phenomenon. This was something ancient, eternal, an evil that had been watching us from the depths of space for an eternity. I decided to check the very latest web data from our sector, which should have arrived in the last few hours while we were arguing with Dugan. I entered my password. Access denied. I tried again. Same thing. My clearance level had been downgraded. Dugan hadn't just dismissed me verbally, he had locked me out of the fresh data. Panic began to rise in my throat. Were they trying to cover this up? Or did they truly not believe it? I quickly downloaded all the files I had on the anomaly to an external hard drive, including the old plate from the Lick Observatory. I felt like a spy in my own institute. I left STSCI late that night, looking over my shoulder. I felt like I was being followed. Maybe it was paranoia, but the sense of danger was real. I went down to the institute's basement where some of the old magnetic tapes and backups were stored. In the dim light, surrounded by shelves of dusty boxes, I felt an oppressive presence, as if the shadow from the 1913 plate had reached through time and space and was now breathing down my neck in this dusty archive. The shadow wasn't just growing in space, it was starting to grow in my life, cutting me off from my colleagues, my work, my sanity. And I knew this was only the beginning. The next few days became a surreal nightmare of bureaucracy and isolation. I tried to contact Maya, but her replies were evasive. She said Dugan had forbidden any discussion of the artifact outside of official channels and that she was busy re-verifying the data. I could hear not just scientific skepticism in her voice, but fear. Fear of losing her job, her reputation. Leo Chang stopped answering my calls and messages altogether. They had cut me off. I tried to go to STSCI, but my access card was indeed deactivated. The security guard at the entrance, a man I'd known for years, just gave me a sympathetic shrug. "Director Dugan's orders, Dr. Keller. I'm sorry." I stood in front of the glass doors of the institute where I had spent most of my adult life, feeling like an outsider, an exile. Behind me stood the modern building, a symbol of scientific progress, but now it seemed like a facade, hiding blindness and fear of the unknown. I returned home to my townhouse, which now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Over and over I reviewed the data I had, the web image with its writhing silhouettes, the old 1913 plate, my calculations of their impossible speed. Everything pointed to one thing, a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. But how could I reach those who refused to listen? I decided on a desperate move, to confront Dugan directly, to appeal to his scientific integrity, to a sense of responsibility. I waited for him outside the institute after he finished work. He looked tired and annoyed. "Dr. Keller, I thought I asked you to take a vacation," he said without stopping. "Director Dugan, you have to listen to me," I said, walking beside him toward the parking lot. "It's not an artifact. I found confirmation on old plates from the Lick Observatory. It was there 100 years ago." Dugan stopped and gave me a heavy look. "Ethan, listen. I understand you're passionate, but your obsession with this idea is getting out of hand. You're seeing things that aren't there. Old plates are full of defects, and your velocity calculations, they're absurd. Maybe you should talk to a professional. The stress of the web launch could have taken a toll." He was suggesting I was crazy. Cold fury mixed with despair.
"You're just scared," I blurted out. "You're scared to admit there's something out there that doesn't fit in your textbooks, something dangerous. What I'm scared of is the reputation of this institute and the billions of taxpayer dollars invested in the web," Dugan shot back. "And I will not allow unsubstantiated panic to jeopardize all of that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." He got in his car and drove off, leaving me alone in the empty parking lot under the gathering dusk. That evening, I called Maya one more time. She picked up after a long silence. "Maya, please, you saw it. You know this isn't just an error." "Ethan, I ran some more tests." Her voice was tense, almost robotic. "There are some anomalies in the sensor data that could theoretically create a similar effect under specific conditions of interference with gravitational waves from an undiscovered source." She was lying, or forcing herself to believe this convoluted hypothesis. She had chosen the side of the system, the side of willful blindness. "Maya," she said quickly. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I have to go. Don't call me about this again, please." And she hung up. I was alone, rejected by my colleagues, cut off from my work, branded a madman. The bureaucratic horror was proving to be just as terrifying as the cosmic one. The system designed to understand the universe was refusing to see what threatened its stability. The feeling of a conspiracy, or worse, of total stubborn blindness was suffocating. They would close their eyes, searching for rational explanations until the crawlers were on their very doorstep. I sat in my living room staring at my laptop screen, where the file with the anomaly was still open, the black patch with the writhing silhouettes inside. It felt like it was looking back at me from the monitor, mocking my powerlessness. And the thought flickered again. Has it gotten a little bigger? Or was this no longer paranoia, but a reality that I was now forced to witness alone while everyone else buried their heads in the sand? The world had shrunk to my laptop screen and the growing shadow in the depths of space, and I was the only link between them. The isolation and the sense of impending doom began to take a toll on my mental state. By day, I frantically searched for any information that might shed light on the nature of the crawlers, digging through old astronomical journals, amateur astronomy forums, declassified military archives, all in vain. At night, the dreams came, or rather, the same recurring nightmare. I'm floating in the void of space. No suit, but I can breathe. Around me are myriad stars, galaxies glittering like diamond dust on black velvet. But I don't feel awe. I feel a chilling terror, because I know they're here. And then from behind the edge of a distant nebula, the first crawler appears. Not just a silhouette like in the images, but a three-dimensional, living, if that word applies, being.
It is vast, far larger than I had imagined. A segmented body, an inky, iridescent black that absorbs the light of the stars, creating a halo of distorted space around it. Along its sides are thousands upon thousands of thin, trembling limbs, like the cilia of a paramecium or the legs of a centipede, rippling as they paddle through the void. It has no eyes, no mouth in the conventional sense, but I can feel its hunger. Not a physical hunger, but something more ancient and terrifying, a hunger for light, for energy, for the very structure of reality. It moves slowly, but inexorably, and I watch as the stars in its path wink out, one by one. It doesn't just block them, it devours them, pulling their light, their heat, their very mass into its impenetrable blackness. In its wake, it leaves only an absolute void, a hole in creation. Then the others appear. Dozens, hundreds. They crawl from the depths of space, writhing, coiling around each other, forming a gigantic, living, pulsing darkness. They approach the solar system. I see them engulf Jupiter, and its great red spot vanishes into the gloom. Then Saturn. Its rings crumble and fade, consumed by the black bodies. And then they are at Earth. I see our planet from above, a blue marble, so fragile and defenseless. The crawlers descend upon it like a plague of locusts. They wrap their inky bodies around it, and the lights of the cities below go out one after another. I hear the silent, psychic scream of a planet in agony. They push through the atmosphere, their ciliated limbs touching the ground, and everything they touch turns to dust and shadow. The earth darkens, shrivels, loses its light and heat, becoming a dead, cold sphere adrift in an eternal night. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd been screaming in my sleep without realizing it. The room felt unfamiliar and hostile in the pre-dawn twilight. I'd sit up in bed trying to catch my breath, and my gaze would inevitably fall on my laptop on the desk. I'd left it on, the screen displaying that same JPEG file with the image of the anomaly. And that's when I would see it. At first, I thought it was an afterimage from the nightmare, a trick of the light, but it wasn't. The patch on the screen, it really had gotten bigger. Not by much, just a few pixels at the edges, but noticeable to my trained eye. And the silhouettes within, they seemed to have shifted, recoiled into a new configuration. A JPEG file, a static image. It shouldn't change, ever. I scrambled over to the laptop, my hands shaking. I checked the file properties. The modification date was the same. I ran a virus scan, clean, but the image had changed. It was living its own life on my screen. The line between the data received by the telescope from trillions of miles away and its digital representation on my computer was beginning to blur, to disappear. This was no longer just an observation of a distant threat. The threat was looking back at me from my screen.
It was growing not only out there in the abyss, but right here, in my house, on my computer. The surrealism of the dream was bleeding into reality. The nightmare didn't end when I woke up. It was just beginning. The physical horror of the dream, the devouring of the planet, was taking on a new, technological dimension. My laptop, my tool of discovery, was becoming a window for what? Observation or something worse? I stared at the altered JPEG and felt reality itself beginning to fray at the edges. The crawlers weren't just out there anymore. They were in here. The realization that the image on my laptop was changing on its own was the final straw. Scientific methods were useless. My colleagues had turned their backs on me, and the system was ignoring the danger. I knew I had to look for answers beyond mainstream science, in the realms I had always considered the domain of conspiracy theorists and crackpots. If the crawlers had been around as long as the 1913 plate suggested, maybe other records of them existed, swept under the rug of history. My frantic online searches led me to fragmented mentions of strange sightings that didn't fit the standard UFO reports. Accounts of living shadows in the sky, of light eaters, of sudden localized blackouts of the night sky. Most were anecdotal, but one reference caught my eye, a link to a classified 1947 U.S. Air Force report, supposedly held at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. 1947, the height of the flying saucer craze. Roswell. Could there be a connection? I had nothing left to lose. I packed a backpack, took my laptop with its precious and terrifying JPEG file, my external drive with the archives, and drove to D.C. The train ride from Baltimore was less than an hour, but it felt like I was traveling to another world, leaving the territory of rational knowledge and entering the twilight zone of conspiracies and hidden truths. The Library of Congress greeted me with its grandeur and silence. Vast reading rooms, endless shelves of books, an atmosphere of centuries of wisdom. But I wasn't interested in the public collections. I was after the archives. After a long and tedious bureaucratic process, using the last vestiges of my academic credentials and a fair amount of bluffing, I managed to get access to the Department of Rare Manuscripts and Restricted Government Documents. I was met by an elderly, severe-looking woman with thick-lensed glasses, the archivist, a Mrs. Wells. She sized me up with a skeptical look. "Dr. Keller, your request is highly unusual. The Air Force report, Project Nightfall, 1947. This document is in special storage and access is strictly regulated." "I understand, Mrs. Wells," I said, trying to sound as convincing as possible. "My research concerns anomalous atmospheric phenomena, and I have reason to believe this report contains crucial data that may have been misinterpreted at the time." She studied my face for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Very well, but you will work under my supervision, and no photocopies, handwritten notes only." We took an elevator down to the sub-basement levels, into the heart of the archive. The air was cool and dry, smelling of old paper and dust. Long corridors with metal shelves disappeared into the gloom. Mrs. Wells unlocked a heavy steel door, and we entered a small, windowless room lit by a single dim bulb. She retrieved a thin folder stamped "Top Secret." The stamp was crossed out, but still legible, and placed it on the table in front of me. "You have 2 hours," she said, and sat on a stool by the door, taking out some knitting. I opened the folder. My hands were trembling slightly. The report was typewritten, the paper yellowed with age. It contained the testimony of several U.S. Air Force pilots involved in night flights over the Southwest in the summer of 1947. They weren't describing flying saucers or glowing lights, but something else entirely. observed a vast patch of absolute blackness against the starry sky, one pilot wrote. It moved at incredible speed, silently. The stars it passed over vanished completely, as if they were switched off. The shape was irregular, like an ink blot, but the edges seemed alive, writhing. Another pilot described a shadow that starved the stars of their light. He claimed his plane's instruments, compass, radio, went haywire as he approached the object. The feeling, he wrote, was that the void itself was looking at me. The third report was the most chilling. The pilot recounted how a piece of this living shadow broke off and headed for his plane. He described it as a many-legged creature made of pure dark. He made a sharp, evasive maneuver and lost sight of it. Upon returning to base, he was in a state of shock, was grounded, and sent for a lengthy psychiatric evaluation. At the end of the folder was an analytical memo dismissing all these sightings as mass hysteria, unusual atmospheric phenomena, or secret tests by a potential adversary. The standard set of explanations for anything inexplicable. But I knew what those pilots had seen. They had seen crawlers, back in 1947. I feverishly scribbled notes in my notebook. The locations of the sightings were scattered, but the Appalachian Mountains region of West Virginia was mentioned most frequently. And one other detail caught my eye. One report mentioned a strange symbol the pilot had supposedly seen on the ground near the sighting. Something like a snake eating its own tail, forming a circle. An Ouroboros? "Time's up, Dr. Keller," Mrs. Wells' voice pulled me from my reading. I reluctantly closed the folder. My head was spinning with information. The crawlers had been here, near Earth, for decades. They had been seen. But the system chose to hide it, to file it away, to classify it. A conspiratorial chill ran down my spine. How many more reports like this were gathering dust in archives around the world?
I thanked Mrs. Wells and went back upstairs, into the brightly lit world of the Library of Congress. But now that light felt fragile and unreliable. The darkness was much closer than I had thought. And it wasn't just in space. It was in our history, in our secrets. My next destination was clear: the Appalachians. Maybe there, in the remote mountains of West Virginia, there were people who remembered more than dusty Air Force reports. The drive into West Virginia was long and unnerving. I was in a beat-up rental pickup, following winding roads deeper into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The landscape changed. The D.C. suburbs gave way first to farmland, then to dense forests covering the slopes of mountains that grew steeper and more imposing. The air grew cleaner, but there was something ancient and heavy in it. The sense of isolation grew with every mile. Cell service had vanished hours ago. My target was a remote cabin in the woods where, according to a fragmented newspaper clipping I'd found in an online archive, a man named Elijah Wofford lived. The clipping was from the mid-'70s and told of strange disappearances in the area and the testimony of the sole witness, a then young Elijah, who had rambled about shadow people and the devourers of light. He'd been dismissed as crazy, of course, but the phrase devourers of light was too close to the 1947 pilot reports and what I'd seen in the web images. Finding the cabin wasn't easy. The last few miles were on a rutted dirt road, barely visible under a layer of fallen leaves. Finally, in a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees, I saw it, a leaning log structure with boarded-up windows and a thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Strange talismans made of feathers and bones hung near the entrance. The atmosphere was oppressive, a mix of decay and hidden fear. I knocked. Silence. I knocked louder.
A raspy voice came from behind the door. "Who is it? Go away." "Mr. Wofford? My name is Ethan Keller. I came to talk to you about what happened in the 70s, about the Devourers of Light." Silence again from behind the door. Then I heard the scrape of a deadbolt being drawn, and the door creaked open a few inches. An eye appeared in the crack, faded, suspicious, ringed with a web of wrinkles. "How do you know that name?" the voice rasped. "I'm a scientist. I've seen something similar in space." The crack widened. Before me stood a withered old man with a long white beard, wearing a ragged flannel shirt. His eyes had a feverish glint. He studied me for a long time, then nodded and let me in. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with shelves of canned goods, firearms, and strange homemade gadgets. The classic dwelling of a prepper, someone ready for the end of the world. It smelled of wood smoke, dust, and something else. Stale fear. We sat at a rough wooden table. "So you've seen them?" Elijah asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They're back?" "I saw something in space, giant dark creatures that absorb starlight. We called them crawlers." The old man's eyes widened in terror. "Crawlers. A fitting name. We called them something else. The cult members called them Katodun. In the old Cherokee dialect, it meant something like the darkness that creeps and devours." And Elijah told me his story. In the early 70s, a strange cult had appeared in these woods. They gathered at night, performing rituals, worshipping the Devourer of Light, Katodun. They believed these entities were ancient gods, sleeping in the darkness between the stars, and that they could be summoned to Earth to cleanse the world by plunging it into primordial night. The cult's leader was a charismatic but insane man who called himself the Shadow Conduit. They used strange symbols, Elijah said, tracing a circle in the dust on the table, bisected by a winding, segmented line. And they said they could open gates, through reflections, through dark mirrors, through screens. Screens? A cold dread settled in my gut. My laptop? People started disappearing, the old man continued. First from the cult, then local folks. I was young and stupid, decided to spy on one of their rituals. I saw the Shadow Conduit standing before a large obsidian mirror under the full moon. He was chanting, and the mirror, it went dark, like a hole in the night. And from it, something crawled out, brack, writhing, with hundreds of legs. It grabbed one of the cultists and pulled him into the mirror. I ran and didn't look back. "What happened after that?" I asked, my lips dry. "The cult vanished, disappeared. Maybe they all went through the portal. Maybe Katodun took them. I don't know. The police only found an abandoned camp and the mirror. It was just a piece of obsidian. No one believed me. I've lived here ever since, alone, waiting. Because I know they'll be back. They always come back." Elijah pointed to an old faded map of the area tacked on the wall. On it, in the region where the cult had supposedly gathered, was drawn the same symbol I'd seen in the Air Force report, a snake eating its own tail, an Ouroboros. "That symbol," Elijah said, they called it the Devourer's Seal, said it marked places where the veil between worlds is thin. The folk horror of the woods was intertwining with cosmic horror and technophobia. The cult of Kathodun, the Devourer of Light, portals through screens. It was insane, but it aligned with my findings in a terrifying way. Elijah wasn't just a crazy old hermit, he was a witness. He had seen a crawler up close. "They're getting closer, Elijah," I said quietly. "I've seen them. They're huge, and they're coming for us." The old man closed his eyes. "Then the time has come. The darkness returns to devour the light. And this time, there are screens everywhere, billions of mirrors for them." I left Elijah's cabin with a heavy heart. The folk horror of his tale added a new, terrifying layer to my understanding of the threat. This wasn't just an alien invasion. This was something ancient, tied to dark cults, to the Earth itself, and it was using our own technology against us. I drove back towards civilization, but now I knew that civilization wasn't a defense, it was a lure. Billions of screens, shining in the night, waiting for the darkness to turn its gaze upon them. I found refuge in a cheap motel, the Blue Ridge Inn, at the foot of the mountains just off the main highway. I needed time to process Elijah's story and decide what to do next. Contacting the authorities was useless. They'd either ignore me or lock me up in a psych ward. Tell the world? Who would believe an astrophysicist quoting an old hermit and talking about a cult of light devourers? I felt trapped. Night fell on the mountains, quiet and starless. The sky was overcast. I sat in the dimly lit motel room, which smelled of disinfectant and stale cigarette smoke. The only light came from my laptop, perched on a wobbly table. I opened the file again. Anomaly, Sector 7G, Deep Field. I decided to do something I had feared since I first noticed the changes in the JPEG file. Play the animation. Using the web data from the few hours of observation I had access to before being locked out, Leo Chang had created a short visualization showing the anomaly in motion. It wasn't a smooth video, more a series of frames showing slight changes in the position of the filaments within the black patch. I had avoided watching it until now, afraid of what I might see. I clicked on the file. The black patch appeared against the backdrop of stars. I watched intently. There, a barely perceptible movement. One of the worm-like shapes inside the patch flexed slightly. Another seemed to retract one of its tendrils. It was like a time-lapse of a nest of snakes. Even in this crude animation, there was a sense of alien, unholy life. I watched, holding my breath. The animation looped, repeating the short cycle of movements. And then something impossible happened. The movement stopped being cyclical. It became smooth, real. One of the centipedes on the screen slowly, hypnotizingly crawled toward the edge of the black patch. Its segments undulated with an organic fluidity that wasn't in the source data. I froze. This couldn't be happening. The animation was made from static frames. It couldn't move on its own in real time. I checked. No other programs were running, no network activity, nothing. Just my laptop, disconnected from the internet, and this file. Then the true nightmare began. The black shape that was crawling toward the edge of the image reached it, and it didn't stop. It crawled outside the window of the image viewer. An inky black, writhing tendril appeared directly on my desktop, over the icons for my folders and shortcuts. It moved, its invisible cilia seeming to ripple, leaving a trail of absolute blackness behind it, erasing the desktop wallpaper beneath. Panic seized my chest in an icy grip. I recoiled from the table, knocking my chair over. It was impossible. Pixels coming to life? No, it was worse than that. The boundary between a digital image and the physical reality of the screen was collapsing before my eyes. The file was no longer just a file. The screen was no longer just a screen. It was becoming a portal, just as Elijah had said. The inky form on my desktop twisted, as if sniffing out its new environment. Then it slowly crawled toward the edge of the laptop screen. I watched, paralyzed by horror and disgust. It reached the plastic bezel of the monitor, and it began to flow over it. A three-dimensional, oily black tendril, like a wet slug, began to form on the surface of the frame, extruding from the two-dimensional space of the screen. It was small, the size of a finger, but it was real. It moved, it writhed, leaving a damp, dark trail on the plastic. that immediately dried, as if absorbed into the material. The technological nightmare had become physical. What had been mere data, an image, an abstract threat trillions of miles away, was now materializing here, in my motel room, crawling out of my own computer. I leaped to my feet and, on pure instinct, slammed the laptop shut. There was a faint, wet squishing sound, as if I'd crushed an insect. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The trembling of pixels had become the trembling of reality. They had found a way through, and my laptop had been the first gate. How many more gates were about to open all over the world? I bolted from the motel room like a man on fire, leaving the slammed laptop on the table. My heart was pounding in my throat, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't know where to run, what to do. I just ran, away from that room, away from that breach.
I burst out into the motel parking lot, bathed in the dim light of lampposts. The air was cool and damp. I stopped, gasping for breath, looking around frantically. It was quiet, just the chirp of night insects. Had I imagined it all? A product of stress, sleep deprivation, Elijah's stories? But then I saw it. A small TV in the window of the motel office, where the night clerk was on duty. The screen glowed with a bluish light, showing some old movie. And on the screen, a small black spot appeared. It grew rapidly, writhing like a drop of ink on wet paper. The clerk, dozing at the counter, didn't notice a thing. The spot on the TV screen grew to the size of a fist, and from it, just like from my laptop, a black, glistening tentacle began to emerge. It flowed over the edge of the screen and hung in the air for a moment before slapping down onto the registration counter. The clerk jolted awake, opened his eyes, and saw the writhing black thing right in front of him. His face twisted in a mask of horror and disbelief. He screamed. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled into my pickup, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving behind the screaming clerk and the motel that had become another gate for the crawlers. I sped down the night highway with no idea where I was going. Any electrical device with a screen, a laptop, a TV, a smartphone, they could all become portals. The world had suddenly become a minefield. How many such screens were active right now across the globe? Billions. I needed gas. The fuel gauge was nearing empty. I saw the lights of a 24-hour gas station ahead and pulled in, hoping it was still safe. The station was brightly lit, a few cars were at the pumps, and there were people inside the convenience store. A normal slice of life on the late-night highway. I got out of my truck, trying to stay away from any screens, but they were everywhere. Small ad displays on the pumps, a large TV mounted near the ceiling inside the store, the screens of cash registers, the smartphones in people's hands. And then it began. First, the large TV in the store flickered. The picture vanished, replaced by a black screen. And then a black ooze began to pour from it. Thick and oily, it ran down the wall, dripping onto the floor. People inside screamed and ran for the exit. Simultaneously, the screens on the gas pumps came to life. Thin black tendrils snaked out of them, writhing in the air. The driver at the next pump dropped the nozzle when one of the tendrils touched his hand. The skin where it touched turned black and seemed to melt and distort. He screamed in pain and terror. My own smartphone vibrated in my pocket. I snatched it out. The screen was black, and I felt it grow warm, soft, as if the plastic and glass were losing their structure. Thin trickles of the same black ooze began to leak from the speaker and the charging port. In horror, I threw the phone as far as I could. It hit the asphalt, and a torrent of blackness poured from the shattered screen, forming a small, pulsating puddle. Panic engulfed the gas station. People were screaming, trying to drive away. But the crawlers were already everywhere. They were crawling out of cash register screens, from tablets in cars, from GPS systems.
small, the size of a hand or a rat, but fast and unbelievably horrifying. They didn't seem to be attacking deliberately, but rather spreading, emerging from their digital layers into our world. I saw one of the creatures leap onto the hood of a car, seep through the windshield as if it were melting wax, and disappear inside. A moment later, the car's headlights died, and black smoke billowed from under the hood. It was a waking nightmare. The tech we'd built for connection and entertainment had become the gates of hell. The threshold had been crossed. The crawlers were no longer a distant cosmic threat or an anomaly on a screen. They were here, among us, crawling out of every glowing rectangle. I jumped back in my pickup, threw it in reverse, and floored it, speeding away from the gas station, now engulfed in chaos and a creeping black darkness. I drove into the night, not turning on the radio or the GPS, afraid of any screen. Where could you run when the enemy could appear from any smartphone, any TV, any digital billboard? There was nowhere left to run. The plague of darkness had begun. What I saw at the gas station was just a local flare-up, a prelude. Over the next few hours, all hell broke loose across the country and then the world. I drove through the night and into the morning, avoiding major cities, taking back roads, stopping only for brief moments in remote places to catch my breath. I had thrown out my smartphone, crushing it with a rock. The pickup was old, with no fancy displays, just analog gauges and a simple radio I didn't dare turn on. I got news in fragments, from conversations with terrified people at the few still functioning gas stations, those not yet overrun, from scraps of newspapers I managed to find. The picture that emerged was apocalyptic. First came reports of massive power grid and communications failures in major cities: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, London, Tokyo. Then panicked news reports about strange creatures emerging from the screens of TVs, computers, and billboards. The reports were quickly cut off, replaced with static, or simply a black screen. The internet collapsed almost immediately. The global network that had enveloped the planet had become the main channel for the contagion. Every connected screen was a potential gateway. I saw it with my own eyes when I drove past a small town at dawn. The streetlights were out. No light shone from the windows of houses. The town was plunged into a darkness and silence broken only by distant, sporadic screams and the wail of a far-off siren. In the central square, where a large digital billboard once hung, there was now a gaping hole of absolute blackness, its edges faintly pulsating. From it, dark shapes slowly, almost lazily, crawled out, dissolving into the morning mist. But the most terrifying thing was happening not on the ground, but in the sky. I stopped on a hill overlooking the east, where the sun should have been rising, but the sky was different. The stars were gone, not hidden by clouds. They simply weren't there. The celestial sphere was a uniform dark gray without a single point of light. And where the sun should have been ascending, there was only a dim, blurry patch, as if a thick veil had been thrown over it. The crawlers were doing what they were made to do. They were devouring the light. Not just the artificial light of screens, but the light of the stars, the light of the sun. They were enshrouding the earth in their shadow, cutting us off from the universe. On a battery-powered radio I had in the truck, I caught a fragment of an emergency broadcast. A stuttering announcer's voice spoke of an unknown phenomenon, a creeping darkness, of a state of emergency and military mobilization. The army was trying to blockade major cities, but it was clear they didn't understand what they were up against.
How do you fight an enemy that can emerge from the screen of your tactical tablet or your night vision scope?
I saw a convoy of military trucks hurrying toward the nearest metropolis. The soldiers, their faces confused and scared, stared out at the landscape. They were going to fight a shadow armed with bullets and missiles. It was futile. The world was descending into chaos. The news networks, while they were still on, went insane, showing footage of panic, destruction, people driven mad with terror, and the dark, writhing figures that grew more numerous and bold. And then they too went silent. The airwaves filled with nothing but the crackle of static. I watched it all from the sidelines, from my temporary isolation, feeling a mixture of horror, guilt, and utter helplessness. I had known, I had tried to warn them, but no one listened, and now it was too late. The plague of darkness had consumed the planet. Cities were going dark one by one. The sky was dimming, and humanity, blinded by its own technology, stood on the brink of a new dark age, perhaps its last. The apocalypse hadn't arrived with fire and brimstone, but with a silent, creeping, all-consuming darkness. And I was one of the few who understood its true nature. But there was nothing I could do anymore. The hopelessness was as thick and suffocating as the darkness itself. The helplessness was eating me alive. To sit by while the world was plunged into shadow, devoured by the crawlers, was unbearable. There had to be a way to warn those who hadn't yet understood what was happening, to explain the nature of the threat, to tell them that the screens were death. The traditional media was silent, the internet was down, and governments were either paralyzed or already consumed. I needed another way. I thought of Leo Chang. He wasn't just a visualization genius. He was a hobbyist of old tech, analog communications, a ham radio operator. If anyone knew how to bypass the collapsed digital infrastructure, it was him. But contacting him was impossible. Then I remembered another contact, a hacker girl I'd met a few times at cybersecurity conferences, Jess Burns, known online as Requiem. She was an anarchist at heart, a hacking prodigy and an expert in old communication systems, which she considered more reliable and secure. Rumor had it she had set up a base for herself somewhere on the Carolina coast, using abandoned military installations. She was my only chance. It took me several days to reach the general area where Jess was rumored to be. It was a desolate stretch of the Outer Banks, famous for its storms and shipwrecks. Navigating by an old paper map and a compass, I found what I was looking for. An old, rusted Cold War-era radar tower, standing alone on a sand dune overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. At the base of the tower was a weather-beaten Airstream trailer, entangled in wires and antennas. A wisp of smoke came from its chimney. I approached and knocked. The door was opened by a young woman with bright red hair, a pierced eyebrow, and the wary gaze of intelligent eyes. It was Jess, Requiem Burns. She was holding an old shotgun. "Keller, what the hell are you doing here?" she asked, foregoing any greeting. "I need your help, Jess, to get a message out." "The world's ending and you want to send a tweet?" she scoffed, but lowered the shotgun. "No, I want to use your equipment, your old radio transmitters, to warn people that the screens are portals, that the darkness is coming from them." Jess looked at me intently. There was no surprise in her eyes. "So it's true," she said quietly. "I was seeing weird shit on the net before it all went down. Corrupted data packets, signatures that shouldn't exist. I thought it was some new virus or cyber attack. But portals from screens. That explains why everything went to hell so fast." She let me into the trailer. Inside, it was crammed with equipment. Old vacuum tube radio transmitters, oscilloscopes, generators, computers, most of which were off and covered with cloth. Only one was running with an ancient monochrome CRT monitor. Analog systems are holding up, for now.
This crap seems to feed on complex digital signals and high-res displays. Good old radio. It's too primitive for them. For now. We worked out a plan. Jess could boost the signal from the old military transmitter on the tower and broadcast it on shortwave and AM frequencies, trying to cover as much of North America as possible. The message had to be simple, clear, and repeated. Danger! The screens kill. The darkness comes from the screens. Destroy your televisions, computers, smartphones. Use only analog radio. I repeat.
While Jess prepped the equipment, I climbed to the top of the radar tower. The wind from the ocean whipped through my hair. Below, the dark, restless Atlantic stretched out. The sky was completely black. But now, in that blackness, I began to make out movement. Giant, barely visible silhouettes, even darker than the night itself, were slowly drifting over the water. Crawlers. They were no longer just in space or in our homes. They were here, in the atmosphere, as huge as zeppelins of the old gods. Suddenly, the sky over the ocean lit up with flashes of lightning, but without thunder. It was an electrical storm of a strange nature, as if the atmosphere itself was reacting to the presence of these monsters. "Ready, Keller! Let's do this!" Jess yelled from below. I climbed down. We powered up the transmitter. The old tubes began to glow and hum. Jess tuned the frequency. I took the microphone. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I began to repeat our message over and over, pouring all my fear, all my hope, all my desperation into it. "This is Dr. Ethan Keller. Danger! The screens kill. The darkness comes from the screens." Our signal shot out into the dead airwaves, a faint spark of reason in the encroaching kingdom of darkness. Would anyone hear it? Would they believe it? Would it change anything? I didn't know. But I couldn't stay silent. This was my last stand, my desperate act of defiance in the face of the apocalypse. The last signal before the darkness swallowed everything. Our pirate radio broadcast for several hours. Jess and I took turns at the microphone, repeating the warning until our voices were raw. There was no way to know if our message had reached anyone. We were isolated on that rusty tower in the middle of a world sinking into shadow. The next day, what I had feared most came to pass. The sky was no longer just gray or black. It became impenetrable, utterly black, even during the day. The last vestiges of sunlight vanished, consumed by an invisible shroud woven by the crawlers. The eternal day without stars had arrived, a day with no sun, no moon. The planet was plunged into a cold, ceaseless darkness, lit only by the occasional fire and the eerie electrical discharges in the upper atmosphere where they now reigned. And now, they were visible. Not just as giant shadows over the ocean, but as distinct silhouettes against the absolute blackness. They hovered in the sky everywhere. Immense, many-legged bodies of concentrated gloom. Their scale was unimaginable. Some seemed larger than mountains. They moved slowly, majestically, and horrifically, patrolling their captured world.
Jess and I abandoned the radar tower. It was too dangerous to stay, a beacon in the dark. We continued south along the coast in the old pickup, using the last of our fuel, trying to find some kind of shelter, though we knew it was likely pointless. We reached the coast of Gulf Shores, Alabama. The white sand of the beaches looked gray in the eternal twilight. The ocean was black and dead. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whisper of the waves and a strange, low hum that seemed to come from above, from the crawlers hovering in the sky. We sat on the beach, looking at these titanic beasts hanging silently over the Atlantic. There were so many of them they almost completely blotted out the horizon. It felt as if space itself was warping around them. And then it hit me. A horrifying, soul-freezing revelation. I remembered the changing JPEG on my laptop.
I remembered how the crawlers crawled out of screens when they were being watched. I remembered the cult of Kato Dun who believed they could summon the devourer of light through rituals and concentration. It wasn't just the screens. The screens were just a catalyst, a focal point. The most powerful portal was our own consciousness. Thought, image, the focus of our attention on them. When I magnified the image on my computer, when I stared at the details, I wasn't just studying them, I was opening a path for them. When the pilots in 1947 observed them, when Elijah watched the cult's ritual, when the motel clerk saw the creature on the TV screen, they were focusing their attention, their consciousness, and that was weakening the barrier between worlds. And now, with the crawlers here, visible to the naked eye, gigantic and terrifying, the very act of contemplating them, the very fear they inspired, the thoughts about them, all of it was feeding them, strengthening their presence in our reality, perhaps even drawing more of them here. Thinking about them was a portal. The cosmic horror of Lovecraft had merged with technophobia and become something even more terrible, a mental trap. The more we fear them, the more we think about them, the stronger they become, the easier it is for them to consume our world. We ourselves were their food and their gateway. I looked at Jess. She was also staring at the sky, at the giant silhouettes. There was terror in her eyes, but also fascination. It was almost impossible to look away. "Jess, don't look," I yelled, my voice breaking. "Don't think about them." She started, turning her gaze to me. "What? Why?" "Thought, Jess. The very thought of them is what they want. They're coming through our consciousness."
But it was too late. I was thinking about them myself. I was trying to understand them, to analyze them. I was looking right at them, and I could feel it. A slight dizziness, a distortion of reality at the edge of my vision. The darkness in the sky seemed to thicken, to draw closer, reacting to my fear, to my thoughts. I realized there was nowhere to run. You can't hide from your own thoughts. You can't not think about the monsters that have blotted out the sky and devoured the sun. Humanity was doomed, not just physically, but mentally. We had become the resonators for this universal darkness. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind, but the images of the crawlers were seared on the backs of my eyelids, even more vivid and horrifying. I could feel the darkness outside and the darkness inside beginning to merge into one. The event horizon had been crossed. Entry 1. Found this place by accident. An old NOAA station. Long abandoned, but the walls are solid. No power, Who is there to thank now? The darkness outside is thick, cold. Sometimes I can hear a humming from above. I don't look. I try not to look. Found a stash of canned food and water here. And this notebook. A journal of some guy named Ethan Keller, an astrophysicist. Looks like he was one of the first to figure out what was happening. Entry 2. Reading his entries. God. Webb, the crawlers, the screens, the cult of Kato Dun. It all lines up with the scraps of info we got before everything went silent. He tried to warn us. His last entry was made right here on this coast. He writes that thought itself is a portal, that you can't think about them. But how can you not think about them when they're everywhere, when the sky is black with them? Entry 3. Keller is gone. His partner, the hacker, Jess, too. There's a short note from her after his last entry in the notebook. He's right. I can feel it pulling. Trying not to think. Trying to... It cuts off after that. What happened to them? Did they just dissolve? Get absorbed? Did they walk into it willingly, unable to take it anymore?
Entry 4. I'm alone in this station. The cans are running low.
has the darkness outside gotten thicker? Or is it just me? I try not to think about them, like Keller wrote. I keep myself busy reading his journal over and over, his story, his discoveries, his terror. It helps distract me from the humming outside. Entry 5. Reread the chapter about Keller's nightmares, about the crawlers devouring the earth. The imagery is so vivid, too vivid. I close my eyes and I can see them, black, writhing with their myriad limbs. Entry 6. The humming is louder now. It's not just outside anymore, but inside my head? The walls of the station, they feel thinner? Or is it a trick of the light? Or the lack of it? Keller's journal is open in front of me. I'm reading his last words about thought being a portal, and I realize, reading his story, immersing myself in his fear, in his knowledge, visualizing what he describes, that's a form of concentration. That's a form of thought. This journal, it's not just a story, it's a conduit, the last conduit. I read it, I thought about them, I opened the door. Entry 8. The handwriting becomes erratic, the letters unsteady. The darkness outside is condensing. It's not outside anymore, it's seeping through the walls, through me? I see silhouettes at the edge of my vision. I hear whispers in the humming. Keller was right. It was all true. If you're reading this, if you found this journal after me, stop. Don't read any further. Don't think about them. Don't picture them. Every word you read, every image that forms in your mind, it's another step toward them. Reading this text is the final, most insidious portal. It's already started for you. Just don't think about the worm that eats the stars. Don't think about the darkness with 1,000 legs. Don't. The entry ends in a sharp, jagged line, as if the writer was dragged away or lost control of their hand. The final page is blank, save for a dark, oily stain that has spread across the paper, as if someone had spilled ink, or as if the darkness itself had begun to seep through the words.